we may get through, halfway through 20, we may not. We'll see how discussion goes, because I want to take this right, and I don't want to rush through it. And I really want the Spirit to speak, and not Marty. But I had to give you a little preference, because, I mean, I'm coming from seeing it and from dealing with it with other kids, and I can tell you that divorce is not something that should be taken lightly. And I don't think a lot of it is, but sometimes divorce is just, I'll tell you this. So I had a friend whose sister, just basically instead of marriage, they just did a contract. And the contract was every 5 years they would renew it. And if they don't renew the contract, then the marriage is over with. And so they didn't see marriage in a biblical, it was basically just a contract. And you see what's happened. Do you realize that back when I was growing up and when I was in high school and elementary, it was like 1 out of 4 or 5 got a divorce. Today it's about half.
Well, it's at least 50%.
Yeah, and it may be even more than that.
And the church mimics the...
And unfortunately, it's just as bad in church culture as it is outside of church culture. So let's look at this. Jesus, first of all, we are definitely in the 3rd year of his ministry. And not only that, but we're really close to him coming to Jerusalem. So he's on his journey. Remember, he was way up here above Capernaum. Then he came down to Capernaum. Now he's starting to travel. And he's going, and we'll see in chapter 20, he'll come down to Jericho, which is right here, and then he'll end up going to Jerusalem. And when he goes to Jerusalem, as we'll see here in chapter 21, that's his the Palm Sunday. So this is the time frame what we're really talking about. So Jesus had finished these words, and he departed Galilee, and came to the region of Judah beyond the Jordan. So he's starting to come down, and he's getting into the Judah area. And a large crowd was following him, and he healed them. Now some of the Pharisees, verse 3, some of the Pharisees came to Jesus, testing him and asking, and now watch how they do this. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? Period. So what was going on in the Pharisees' mind? First of all, you got to understand, divorce is not just something that is just sprung up recently. Divorce has been going on all the way back when Moses was leading the people out, and he had to deal with divorce issues constantly in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. You'll see where he talks about this. And some of the things, if you read the Torah, it's not only divorcing between a man and a woman. It has a lot to do with if you get a woman who was a slave, and you bring her into her home, and you want to marry her, or you want to give her to your son. And again, it's kind of hard to understand that whole slavery piece that was going on at this time. But Moses was having to deal with all this stuff. So bottom line is that when Adam and Eve disobeyed God, we are constantly stuck in sin. And so if you remember as we studied through Genesis, sin had got so prevalent. There was only one righteous family out of all of it, and that was Noah. And God said, we'll put a stop to this. It's still prevalent. It hadn't changed. But what's going on here is the Pharisees, and there was 2 views. Okay, there was these 2 rabbi leaders, and they had 2 different views, and it goes back to Deuteronomy and how Moses had talked about divorce and what was permissible. Okay, wasn't a command from Moses. It was a permission, because, and you'll see this in a minute where Jesus says he did this because they were hard-hearted. But they took what he said, and just like today, we take scripture and we want to, I don't really agree with this, and we want to try to make it fit our pattern. And so we had these 2 rabbis, and they were leading rabbis, and one was saying, was really liberal, anything at all, you can divorce it, period. The other one said, no, it has more to do with sexuality and everything else. And if it's not that, then you're not supposed to divorce it. So those were the 2 extreme views that were going on. But this, what they do is they wanted to open the wide open door, hoping that Jesus would meet them halfway, right?
In the door, right.
Let's go ahead and open this door wide open. Is it okay for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? But Jesus turns around and answers and says, have you not read, and he takes them all the way back to Genesis. He says, have you not read who created them from the beginning, made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, shall be joined with his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. And therefore, whatever God has joined together, let no man separate. So yes, when you go to a wedding, you'll hear, hey, you're making an agreement. And especially if it's a Christian wedding, but even in non-Christians, that a person will kind of read these scriptures and say, this is what God's joining together. This was God's plan at the very beginning. God, let's just stop real quick and just kind of remember, Adam was created. God started creating that, and you had animals, but what did God do with Adam and the animals?
Dominion.
Well, okay, dominion, but what else?
He named
above all of them.
Huh?
He made him above all of them.
He made him above them, but he also said, hey, he needs a suitable helper.
Yeah.
He needed a suitable helper. And so he had Adam go and name and meet up with each of these animals. It was important that Adam did that, because Adam found out that there wasn't a suitable helper in all those other animals. Now, man got along with the animals because they were all created. There wasn't a lion trying to kill the man and everything else. Adam named all the animals, the Bible says. But it found out that there was no suitable helper. So God puts Adam into what kind of sleep?
Deep sleep.
Deep sleep. Now, I may have said this before, but if I forgot, this is where the guy that came up with the type of drugs for putting people into a deep sleep to do surgery, this is where he got his idea from, and saying, hey, if God could take Adam and put him into a deep sleep, if we could take people and put them into deep sleep, they wouldn't feel the pain. And so this is where we get this from. And so what happened is God puts Adam into a deep sleep, takes a rib from his side, and fashions. Now, Adam was created from what? Dirt and dust. God breathed in it. Takes a bone from Adam and creates a woman. Woman is not a bad word, okay? It was a endearing word, okay? It was the suitable helper. So again, when Adam sees Eve, it's like, Yahoo! It was like bone for my bone, flesh for my flesh. Hey, you are nothing like animals, okay? And so therefore, what God had put together, man couldn't separate. But man has been separating constantly. And so what happens is he goes all the way back to Genesis, and he says, hey, look, this is what God has said. He puts, from the very beginning, God's plan was for two people to come together under God, and only God could remove that. Now, we'll see what Jesus has to say later on as far as what breaks that up and stuff like that. But it was God who's supposed to separate, not man. Okay? So, then they asked him, well, then why did, and look at the word here, why did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and send her away? Again, this is going from Deuteronomy chapter 24. And he said to them, because of your hardness of your heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning, it was never meant to be this way. Okay? Now, if you go back, and we're not going to study in Deuteronomy chapter 24, if you go back and read Deuteronomy chapter 4, you'll find out that what happens in a real short thing, a man marries a woman, he doesn't like her anymore. He sees some indiscretion about her. The word used in Hebrew may be a sexual thing, but it's not really quite clear. So that's why you had these two rabbis digging over this one little Hebrew word, whether or not it was whether it was sexual or just for any reason at all. I mean, back then, when the Pharisee says, "Can we divorce a woman for whatever at all?" If the woman burnt the bread, get her out of the house. Again, it's how people valued a woman in the first place. It was no longer a person to be a suitable helper. It almost turned into a property, or in some respects, it was almost like slavery.
It's chattel is the word that they.
Yeah, it's putting,
Possession.
it's a lot of pride and possession and everything else. But see, here the thing is they took what Moses said, and if you read Deuteronomy chapter 4, what happened is the man could, divorce his wife. So she went off, and she gets remarried. Now that husband doesn't want her anymore. And what Moses said, if you read chapter 24, what Moses says is that, hey, that woman cannot go back to the first husband because she has already had a sexual relationship with the second husband. Okay? So it wouldn't be wrong to go back to that first husband. He didn't, this is where Moses was coming from. It wasn't a command from God saying, God says this is what God had told Moses how to allow divorce and to work through. As Jesus said here, he permitted something to happen, not commanding it and stuff like that. So here's the thing.
So Marty, so back in like Solomon's times, he had multiple wives.
Gosh.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
but that was,
He never divorced them.
That's
So
basically
don't
it.
ask the question, was he wrong? Yes.
So he just didn't divorce him.
But he didn't divorce him. No, he just
Divorced
Yeah.
him. Not gonna
and let's not pick on Solomon because Solomon had a bunch, but David had a bunch.
So
I mean-
was that going on during Jesus' time also?
Yes.
Yes.
So they still had multiple wives.
Yes.
Okay.
So look at the Arab nation today. The Arab nations, there's men who can afford it, has a harem, whatever you want to call it, huh? Harem, and they have multiple wives.
Okay.
And yeah, I can't conceive that, but but still, and it's kind of crazy. But the thing is that still wasn't God's plan. Now let's go back to Genesis, because remember what Jesus, and this is a key piece of this. When they join together, they shall become what? One flesh. Okay? There was that sexual intimacy. And one thing I teach students a lot of times when we talk about sex is just think about this. You go and you have premarital sex. You have sex with this boyfriend or this girlfriend. Oh man, sex drives are wow. It is. God's given us a sex drive. This is a God-given thing. But He's asked us to put it within His boundaries. When we go outside that boundary, but just think about it. You go off and you have sex with this girl. Well, you've already become one with that girl. Now what happens? You break up. She goes off her way, you go off your way. She goes off and she gets another guy. He may have already had sex with somebody else. Now just think about it. Not only are you having sex with that next guy, but you're having sex because that guy's already had sex probably with somebody else. And it just grows and grows. And the whole intimacy, the whole oneness that God was trying to create through that marriage is no longer a oneness at all. Now, think about this. Why did Malachi, God, say, I hate divorce? Because if you go back to Ephesians, Paul was talking about this in chapter 5, and he says, I'm going to tell you a mystery. Because first of all, he goes through in Ephesians and he says, hey, husbands or wives, submit to your husbands. He starts that way first. Then he turns the page on the husbands, and he says, oh, husbands, you better take care of your wives. Why? Because you should take care of the same way that Christ takes care of the bride who is what? The church, right? That's us. How did Christ take care of the bride? He died for her. Now the thing is that's a whole philosophy change, to the way philosophy is going on at that time and even today. Because that means you're laying down your life for your bride. It's no longer all about me.
It's the highest regard.
Yeah, it's a high. And Paul will teach in Corinthians, he'll say, hey, look, you're not control of your own body. If you're married, your wife is, and so if you want to, if you want to have sex. Don't withhold from each other. So those passions would build up, and so it leads to people looking for that enjoyment somewhere else, is what Paul was teaching in Corinthians. But so bottom line is, and here's the neat word. The thing, he says, I say to you, verse 9, that whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Now he said this